Hey, good afternoon and welcome to another Thursday afternoon streaming live from the Coachella Valley. Now, if you're not sure where the Coachella Valley is, it is in the sunny part of Southern California, known as the desert, but here it is, June 22nd, and I don't think it's going to get to 100 degrees. It's another phenomenal day, and we are enjoying the weather. Hey, before we get started, I want you to think about something. Have you ever heard that term, leading economic indicators? Yeah, what that means in layman terms, because I'm just from West Texas, we'll keep it simple, is it just means, hey, what can we look at that will give us a sign of where things are and where things may be going? Well, that's real estate. And real estate and lending are two big leading economic indicators. And we have somebody who is a genius when it comes to interpreting the leading economic indicators to tell us, like, you know, if we were in a Conestoga wagon going across the plains, he's the guy out front that says, do not take this left turn or don't go down this canyon because it's a box canyon. This is Art Alvarez with Mortgage Works, and he is here for Mortgage Minute. Art, welcome. How you doing today?
Hi, Jeff. Thanks. I'm doing well. I have to admit I have run into a few box canyons over the years. So.
But you didn't lead anybody down it, right? You stopped us from going down the canyon. That's good.
I escaped.
Yeah, there you go. Well, a lot of good things going on today.
It's been an interesting week. Of course, we had Chairman Powell of the Fed making some comments both yesterday and today. And so, as always, it has a little bit of an effect on the markets.
I was kind of excited. I thought maybe after the meeting, what was it, last week, that he was going to kind of maybe stop tweeting, if you will. But he seems to be pretty active and wants to stay involved in what's going on.
Well, he had to talk to Congress both yesterday and today. And the challenge is that he continues to be very hawkish in his rhetoric about the fact that the fight for getting inflation down is not over, and that this pause should not be taken too lightly as an indication that they're not going to keep focused on getting inflation under control, getting it down to 2%, and suggesting we're going to see some more increases in the Fed funds rate.
You know, I don't want to put you in a box canyon, but I'm thinking sometimes, especially since it's so fresh in so many of our minds, of the whole COVID thing. You know, we're thinking, is this time to come out of it? Is it okay? Can we take off our mask? Can we go back to having social contact and stop standing on those red dots while we're waiting in line at the store? Is that kind of what's going on now? I mean, is it that, there's so many little things going on out there that don't seem to be slowing our economy down? We're just like, hey, we're going forward no matter what. Like as an example, like now artificial intelligence is blowing up and that's creating all kinds of opportunities. Is that kind of what's going on here?
I think so. Well, there's mixed signals, right? In fact, this morning, jobless claims came out. 264,000. They're at a 20-month high. So when you look at that, you say, well, wait a minute, there's some signs of some problem in the job market. But on the other hand, there's other data that's coming out that gives you entirely different perspective or story as to where the economy is. So that's part of the challenge here, is kind of pulling through all these mixed signals to really figure out what the direction is.
Well, I don't want to steal any of your thunder because I know you've been reading the tea leaves this morning and you're ready to go. Before I let you go, I want to mention for those people coming on live that I'll be in the backside and I'll be watching for comments. If you have questions, this is the show. If you come with questions, Art will give you answers and they're on the house. So make sure to put them in the comments. If you happen to be watching this on recorded, please put your comments in there and we will, once again, Art will grab those and give you an answer. So keep those in mind. Art, any other questions before I dive out of here?
No, I think we're ready to go.
All right, let's get going. Thank you. Have a great
All right. Thanks, Jeff. Welcome, everybody, to this week's Mortgage Minute. Got a lot of interesting things to talk about. Jeff, of course, has already pulled up our rate grid on our website because, as you know, I always start off by wanting to talk about mortgage rates, give you an update on where they're at. So there you can see on the grid. In fact, one other thing to note, the grid you might see is a little bit taller, if you will, and that's because we've added two additional programs, a HELOC and a fixed rate second program, also known as a HE loan. So now you can see rates posted for those as well. So what's going on with rates this week? Well, I would say that in general, despite some newsy stuff going on, market's kind of in a holding pattern. It's in what we would call a narrow trading range, although within the last day or two, maybe with a little bit of an upward trend. And you can see that when you look at the 10-year bond yield chart over the past 5 days. It's interesting. Last Friday, we were at 10-year bond yield about 3.73. Right now, today, it's finished up right around 380. Why is that happening? Well, a couple things. We had Chairman Powell of the Federal Reserve had comments made to Congress both yesterday and today, and he continued his hawkish rhetoric about the fact don't read too much into this pause that they just did in June, and that they're fully focused still on fighting inflation, getting that number down to 2%, that we're not there yet. And so there will be more rate increases coming. Now, as to what magnitude and how many, we don't know yet. But you can see here over the just last day or so how the bond yields has run up in response to that. Now, the other thing that happened, which was kind of a surprise that I think is a factor, is the Bank of England just announced a 0.5% increase in their benchmark rate. Pretty strong, pretty aggressive. That was not expected. I think that's also what's pushed bond yields up a little bit. So in that respect, I think the good news out of this is we've been at 380 on the 10-year bond yield a few times this year. We seem to be kind of in that holding pattern where we're not busting through that. And I think generally that should be taken as a good sign that we're still in that narrow trading range. You can see conforming loans rates are right around 6% to low sixes. So if we can maintain that stability, then I think we're well poised for when rates do start coming down, either later this year or into next. Okay, with that, I want to go back to a subject I've talked about before, just a few months ago, I think, in fact, a couple months ago, and that has to do with trigger leads. And I wanted to give you an update on what's going on there because, well, first of all, let me just go over again, what is a trigger lead? Well, what happens is when a hard pull mortgage credit report is pulled, the bureaus, Experian, Equifax, TransUnion, they sell consumer information to mortgage originators who then will call that individual and frankly put the hard press on them, pretty aggressive sales techniques, pretty much almost to the point of harassment, trying to talk that consumer out of stopping the loan process that they've already started with one lender who pulled their report, and then switch over to them because they've got a better deal, better mousetrap, whatever. It can be in these times with mortgage volumes challenged, mortgage originators are hungry, so you can just imagine how aggressive they can be in going after consumers when they buy these trigger leads. So, and again, every time I start a new transaction, I'm usually getting feedback in that regard from our borrower. So what I wanted to bring to your attention, there's now a new update on the legislative front as it relates to getting this under control. A few months ago, I mentioned a previous proposal, which was actually HR 2656, but we pointed out at the time that proposal had some problems. It really wasn't designed adequately enough. So now there's a new one that was just proposed within the last week. It's HR 4198, and this is called Protecting Consumers from Abusive Mortgage Leads Act. And this one we think is going to work, that we think it's going to make progress and probably get put in place. And the reason is that this new proposal is going to be more likely to succeed because one of the things it does do is it carves out an exception for mortgage lenders to be able to contact the borrowers within their own servicing portfolio. So whenever you're, if you have a mortgage and whoever you're making your loan payments to, they're servicing your loan and your loan is within their servicing portfolio. And the industry had made a point of suggesting that the previous proposal, which didn't have that carve out, would be destructive to the mortgage industry. And so this proposal carves that out so that at least a lender can protect their own servicing portfolio. But beyond that, this still has the required, I think, guardrails, as we call it, to make sure that trigger leads are going to be much more under control and you won't find yourself harassed as much as is currently being done. So you can read the details here. What I would tell you is that if you think you're going to be getting a mortgage anytime soon, you can opt out to avoid trigger leads until this legislation's in place. Feel free to contact me. I can get you the information, or just Google it on the web there. how to opt out from mortgage trigger leads, and you'll find I'm sure you'll find the information to opt out. And by the way, this information is coming from an organization called AIM. That's the Association of Independent Mortgage Experts. Now, they're a trade group that is very much behind getting this in place, frankly, to help consumers to avoid some of the sort of downside of the loan process we put people through. So again, just wanted to give you that update. We should have hope soon that those kind of calls will be diminished quite a bit. Okay, well, one of the things I always try to do to prepare for the program is to kind of keep an eye on what's going on in financial news, specifically as it relates to real estate, as well as the stock and bond markets and so forth. And as you know, I've always I've mentioned when we started doing this show that you want to beware of the headlines, because generally speaking, headlines can be not maybe so positive, or at least not as positive as maybe they could be at times. So this week I came across a couple of articles that I wanted to talk about because I was grabbed by the headline. And one was called, it was from Yahoo Finance, and it indicated getting a mortgage hasn't been this tough in a decade. Well, of course, that caught my attention because I really wanted to see what the writer had to say about that. Why was this headline in place? What are they trying to tell us? Well, it turns out this article was about actually an index that was first created in 2012. And it's called let me find it here, the Mortgage Credit Availability Index. Now, this index was created, of course, as the name would imply, to monitor mortgage credit availability. Now, of course, you have to ask the question, so what factors go into mortgage credit availability, particularly to suggest that now getting a mortgage is much more difficult than it used to be? Well, one of the things that this index measures is the level of consolidation and reduced capacity in the industry. Well, right now, of course, that's exactly what's been happening with a big drop-off in real estate transactions, and in particular mortgage volumes with the lack of refis. There's been lots of consolidation in the mortgage industry, reduced capacity with layoffs, et cetera. So that obviously can be a factor in terms of availability of mortgage credit. Now, the other thing is that this index is supposed to measure some things like pullback of like loan to value and lower credit scores. In other words, the idea that lenders are pulling back on lending for scenarios that involve very high loan to values or minimal down payments and lower credit scores. Well, what's interesting about that is if you look at those two bullet points, these factors, well, I'm here to say I would argue that it probably has more to do with the consolidation and the reduced capacity in the industry. Why? Because of the fact that mortgage rates are now more than double what they were, in the last, basically since 2021. So with that being said, the other thing I would want you to know is this article did point out that the recent credit score controversy, where higher credit score borrowers were paying more, lower credit score borrowers were paying less, that was not a factor. That's not part of how this index is measured. So that was not pointed to as a factor in the conclusion of this index, at least where this index is right now. And by the way, the reduction in the mortgage availability, mortgage credit availability, wasn't by huge amounts. It was about 2 to 3%, so not substantial. So one of the things I just want to leave you with is don't get too caught up in this headline thinking it's really gotten tough to get a mortgage. Now, other than the fact that it's a little tougher because rates are higher, payments are higher, we still have to meet those debt ratios. I will tell you that with all the basic programs available, conforming in government, so we're talking Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA, USDA, the loan to values are still at 97 for conventional for a first-time home buyer, 96.5 for an FHA borrower. You don't have to be a first-time home buyer. USDA, if you're eligible based on income size and so forth, zero down payment is still available. So all the basic programs are still there. Are some lenders maybe creating some overlays to tighten a little bit? Yeah, they're out there. As a broker, we have access to many lenders, so we can help you get around that and make sure you're not dealing with or getting terms that are reflective of lender overlays that diminish the kind of terms that you're able to get. So just keep that in mind. Okay, now with the next one that I saw, and I have to say I was a little bit, I had to reflect on the fact that I've had a lot of experience and a lot of conversations with borrowers about our next subject. And this was an article that was in USA Today. And the headline was praying for a recession to afford a home purchase. Well, when I saw that, I had to, kind of not chuckle, but kind of realize that, yeah, that's sad but true in a way. And let's talk about what does that mean? Why is that headline even there? Um, and the headline started off by indicating that 64% of Americans are ready to see a recession because they believe that will help them afford to buy a home. And of course, what does that mean? Well, the implication is that I think most Americans think that a recession is going to bring more favorable interest rates, which, well, history does suggest that that has been the case. What's also a little bit disturbing about the article is that more than 3 in 5 Americans believe they'll never be able to afford to buy. I find that to be an astonishing number, and I would suggest to you that based on my experience, that number is in part the degree to which that may be happening to consumers out there who want to buy is I think that may be kind of self-inflicted. And what I mean by that is there's a remarkable number of people I encounter who do want to at least talk a little bit about getting a mortgage. And they find out after, with my help, that they may actually qualify for more than they think they can. So I think there's a lot of misconception out there in the general public and with consumers about their ability to qualify. And I really would urge anybody to kind of really focus on that, talk to an expert like ourselves, and we can let you know really if that's true or not. And I would argue there's probably a higher percentage of people who can afford to get a mortgage. They just don't know it, and they need some help to make that determination. So that's one of the interesting things about the article that I just wanted to make sure I pointed out. But it is true. A recessionary economy does generally tend to lower mortgage rates. Why? Well, I think we're going to encounter that here in the relatively near future. Yes, the Fed is still raising the Fed funds rate. They're now saying they're going to do that a couple more times. But once they get that inflation number to their satisfaction at that 2%, that's probably going to be because they've generated a recession. And when that happens, the general strategy is then to start lowering rates. So I think that is going to happen. And why? It's basically forced by the Fed, but there is a sort of a prize at the end of the rainbow once we get to that recessionary level. Now, the problem with that is, of course, it puts some segment of the market, in the public, in a poor economic situation. But the mortgage business tends to kind of go counter-cyclical like that. If you think about the pandemic, well, that was very hard on all kinds of workers, all kinds of types of businesses, but yet others did pretty well. And frankly, the mortgage business was probably as good as I've ever seen in 40 years at a time when we had a worldwide pandemic with lots of economic hardship throughout not just the country and the world. So in that regard, it's kind of odd, but it's true that the mortgage industry and the level of the economy or the strength of the economy sometimes goes in opposite directions. So in that regard, I just think keep in mind, though, that as you think about this, I would not just pray for the recession because you think rates are going to fall and then look to buy, as we talked last time. I think it's actually a better strategy. Take advantage of purchasing now if you have a need and a want to do that. And if you can qualify, which we can help you determine, I think you're better off. Get into that home now. Let's help you in terms of figuring out how to subsidize that rate so you can get better payment terms. That way you can get into home ownership now. And then you'll see an increase in equity once those rates do fall. And then at the time those rates fall, refinance your note rate into a lower rate. You've got a win-win. You've got a home you already own. You've got a higher property value, and then you can refinance into that lower rate. So anyway, I wanted to touch on that news article, just if nothing else, to clarify what does it really mean and what is that relationship between a recession, mortgage rates, and the mortgage industry. So I think hopefully that will has been of help to you. So with that, I think I'm ready to go ahead, Jeff, and go into our closing question. So let me let you know what that was, just as a reminder. And that is, and I felt I had to ask this question or leave it because I run into it so often. And by the way, folks, with this closing question, I do want to point out, I fully realize as I leave the question, which I'll do on this week's episode, you have the ability to go Google the question right away and kind of get an idea of where I'm going for next week's episode. I totally get that. But for some of you, you'd rather not, take the trouble and wait for me to explain it to you, or I can give you my perspective on it, just having been in the industry so long, and maybe that'll be of help to you. So with that, last week's closing question was, does shopping for a mortgage hurt your credit score? And I'm here to tell you that the answer is no, at least not in a material way, about 99.9% of the time. And so one of the things I thought I would do is simply, frankly, I went to the FICO website, Fair Isaac and Company, sort of the pioneer in creating credit scores, and pulled information directly from their site. So I want to give them credit for this, that addresses this subject directly. And so Jeff will pull up these bullet points, and you can see here where FICO discusses the fact that a mortgage, an inquiry, particularly a mortgage inquiry, has very little effect on your score. And in fact, and that's particularly true if you're getting your credit pulled for a mortgage purpose within a 30-day period, even if you get that done from a multiple number of lenders, which some people do, at least a couple anyway. And then even after the 30-day period, these multiple inquiries are counted as one inquiry. So from that perspective, I do want to just reassure everyone, there's much too concerned about mortgage inquiries, frankly, even if they're hard inquiries. And so, in fact, what I find is most folks who are most concerned about mortgage inquiries, they probably have other reasons to be concerned about their credit score and why it is where it is, as opposed to inquiries being the major factor. There's usually something else going on that creates a score to be where it's at. Inquiries are usually not the leading factor to really drive people's scores down by huge amounts. So I just want to make sure you're aware of that, so that when you're ready to shop for a mortgage, don't get too freaked out about this. It's really not going to hurt you much. Now, having said that, we do, like pretty much any mortgage originator does now, we do offer the option of doing a soft pull report at your initial consultation with us, or when you initially inquire with us. But keep in mind that we do have to take and do a hard pull if we're going to take that next step, get you pre-approved and get you approved through the Fannie Mae desktop underwriter or Freddie Mac loan prospector automated underwriting systems. In those situations, we have to do a hard pull, and your real estate agent, the seller's agent, is going to need to see that. So just keep that in mind. So of course, if we start with a soft pull and then have to do a full hard pull, you're adding a little bit to your credit score cost once you do close that transaction. So just keep that in mind. But otherwise, it's really nothing to worry about. Now, with that, I'll go ahead and bring up this week's closing question. Pretty simple one. So here it is. What is an I-10 borrower? Again, what is an I-10 borrower? Well, stay tuned next week at the Mortgage Minute. Well, where I will have the answer for you, and it'll be on the house. Jeff, back to you.
Art, good stuff. As always, you are on point and reminding us to not freak out over these headlines, and really to dig in a little bit more. So it's so easy to get caught up in the whole thing about it's even harder than in a decade to get a home loan, and that one thing be the discouraging point over dinner with your significant other or spouse to say maybe now's not a good time to buy, and yet the reality is it's an excellent time to buy.
Well, exactly. The frustration, because so many people headline, and they'll talk out of believing they have a chance at all. It's just sort of the path of least resistance. Now, that index was created in 2012 when that was right after the crash of '08. The industry was adapting to sort of a new environment, a whole new set of rules in terms of people getting qualified. So, was it more difficult then to get a mortgage than, say, 2005? Sure. But I think from that perspective, that has served us well now because we do not have that glut of homes hitting the market that they closed on because people got loans that they couldn't afford.
Well, another thing I want to ask about, and it really ties into that leading economic indicators we were talking about at the beginning, is we have and you've talked about this in the past, that we have an inventory shortage. And yet the home builders are building, many of them are building as fast as they can. Although we have such a backlog, we're well behind where we need to be. What does that do for the lending and those people looking to try to buy a home?
Well, there's a couple of issues there, actually. The new home market actually is doing reasonably well in this environment, even with higher rates, for a couple of reasons. One is that, housing starts and permits are up. Why? Because they're trying to they're trying to add to that, crazy low inventory that we have. And in that regard, the home builders are much more dialed into, and we've talked about this before, they understand the role financing plays and mortgage rates plays in getting their existing inventory sold. So they don't hesitate to cut their margins, participate on the loan side, and provide loan options where rates are subsidized, payments are subsidized, and that's generating some sales that they otherwise wouldn't be getting right now. And that's why the sales rate on the new homes segment of the market is doing relatively better than the resale market, because while we've been kind of pushing agents and sellers of private homes to understand the ability that financing has to help them, both the buyer and seller, get homes sold, it's just not as been accepted as much. So as a consequence, we've got the new home market doing relatively well. The resale market's a little tougher. There's less inventory. Sellers are still less inclined to help that buyer afford that resale home. So I think that is driving some of those buyers to the home market. I mean, I've pre-qualified a few folks this year, and it happens every year, where the resale agent initially intending to take that buyer to go find a resale home. Next thing you know, they're calling me saying, "Hey, I need a pre-approval letter for Lennar. We're over here at their new home site." And why? Because the home builder, especially the national home builders, they cooperate with real estate agents. So they encourage a resale agent to bring who otherwise would have been the resale borrower over to the new home site, register them at the sales office on the first visit. That agent can get a commission, sometimes 2 or 3%, walk away, just wait for the check, and the buyer's on their way, and whoever the home builder is, their system to buy the house. And most major national home builders are now in the mortgage business. They have their own mortgage division. So independent mortgage originators like ourselves, or even the major banks, whatever, if they're not already in bed with that builder, if that builder's got their own mortgage operation, then they fight very hard to capture that loan and make sure that borrower doesn't go outside. They can't force the home buyer to use their in-house lender, and they can't prevent them from going out. But they can choose to not offer incentives if that buyer goes to an outside lender that they would get if they stayed with the in-house home builder's mortgage division.
Well, it just shows once again that sometimes, there's segments of any market that say, well, this is the way we've always done it, and so we're not going to make that shift, where, again, the home builders have what I'll say more of an entrepreneurial mind of saying, hey, we've got inventory, we've got to move it. How creative can we be? And this is an option, which you've talked about. You introduced this months ago about the buy down option and getting people involved and getting homes sold. And it sounds like there's a possibility where people, let's say they find a resale home that they fall in love with, but then they compromise or settle for possibly moving to a new home because of the financing. And that's a sad move when the agent has the ability to say, hey, we can make this happen. Here's an option. And I know the lender who will do this for us.
Yeah, I think that's a very strong sentiment that we're trying to kind of change some minds. And this current period is interesting. Last week or two, the news on the inflation front and what the Fed's doing has been kind of negative as to rates. But mortgage rates have been able to kind of hang in there and not really go through the roof. And yet there's still talk that with a few more Fed increases, the Fed funds range, which is currently 5.25, could go to 7. Well, if a Fed funds rate goes to 7, mortgage rates will be 7, maybe even in the 8s. So you've got this odd time where in the very short run, yeah, there's some possibility Fed keeps going, raising Fed funds, we end up with a 7+ mortgage rate. I mean, well into the sevens. But I think that'll be right on the precipice of mortgage rates are then going to come down because the Fed really is going to force a recession. And when that happens, that's where the rate's going to turn around. So in the meantime, do you wait for that all to happen? Or if you have a need and want to buy, you need a bigger house for your family, what have you, go after it now. We're still at better rates than those predictions. Use some buy down strategies to get that payment rate low the first couple of years, and then you're well positioned to experience that appreciation of value when rates do eventually start to go down. So.
Art, we see your information on the screen here, and I want to ask a question. And I see a lot of multi-family, properties being built here in the Southern California area. And for those people who are now paying rents that are, let's say they're very high, are you someone they can contact and say, hey, should I be paying a $3,500 rental payment on an apartment, or should I consider buying a home? Can you help them walk through that?
Oh, absolutely. We do that all the time, and we encourage folks to call us so we can help them with that. I had an agent call me a week ago looking for, do I know anybody who's got a home for rent for $4,000? And my response was, they're going to pay $4,000 rent, they should buy a home. Now, they may have other reasons why that doesn't make sense, but if they're foregoing that, they should at least talk to somebody like us. We can show them the numbers and make them realize that they do have that option that they should consider.
Well, if you're watching this and you're in that position, maybe you're tired of paying that high rent and not getting any benefit from it, because there's a host of them, and Art can talk to you specifically about that. Then give him a call. His number is 760-883-5700. That's the office, and of course you can get him directly on his 714-612-9035. That's his cell number, and Art does work 24/7, 7 days a week. No, probably not. He probably will answer. Yeah, that's just the kind of guy he is. And keep in mind, Art has been doing this for now 40+ years. There's nothing he hasn't seen. And if there's someone you need in your corner, he is your guy. If you want to just check him out, mwloans.com is their website. And of course, you can always get a hold of Art via mail at art@mwloan.com. Art, any last words before we let you go today? We really appreciate it. You're always a plethora of information that we can, I call it walk-away news, that we can say, hey, we can start taking action with this today.
Yeah, no, I guess my comments would be, don't panic. Don't focus too much on the negative news. I think we're hanging in there pretty well. I think people are settling into the current conditions. So again, if you're in the market at all, even thinking about it in terms of home ownership, I would urge you sooner than later is a better approach, and we'd be happy to help you out.
Hey, make sure to join us every Thursday at 2 o'clock from 2 to 2:30. Bring your questions, leave with answers, because as Art will always say,
we have the answers and they're on the house.
Art, until next week, take care. We'll see you then.
Thanks, Jeff. So, hello, everybody. Take care.